A strange figure sat by their fire, claiming to have been invited. The fire had burned low by the time Eli noticed him, reduced to a shallow bowl of embers and a few stubborn tongues of flame licking at blackened logs. The forest beyond the ring of light was dense and absolute, tree trunks packed so tightly together that the darkness between them felt solid, like a wall. The figure sat on the opposite side of the fire, knees drawn up, hands folded loosely in his lap. Eli stopped breathing. For a moment, his mind refused to reconcile what his eyes were seeing. No footsteps had approached. No branches had cracked. The forest had been unnaturally quiet for hours. No insects, no owls, no distant whine through the canopy. The man, or what looked like a man, had simply been there. "Claire," Eli whispered. She looked up from tightening the strap on her pack and froze. The color drained from her face as she followed his stare. The figure did not move. Firelight crawled across his outline, stretching his shadow long and thin behind him. He was dressed plainly. Dark clothes that absorbed the light rather than reflected it, but the details felt wrong. His shoulders were too narrow, his arms too long, his head tilted slightly forward, chin tucked as if listening intently. "You're early," the figure said. His voice was soft, almost careful. Each word sounded individually shaped, as though spoken by someone who had learned language through observation rather than use. Eli swallowed. "Who are you?" The figure blinked slowly. When he raised his head, the firelight revealed eyes that didn't quite catch the glow, dark, reflective only at certain angles. "I was invited," he said. Claire shook her head. "No, you weren't." The figure smiled, or approximated one. His mouth curved upward, but the muscles around it didn't engage. The expression stayed fixed a second too long. "That's not what I was told." Eli glanced toward the forest behind the figure, heart pounding. The trees stood motionless, branches frozen mid-reach. The silence pressed down, thick enough to make his ears ache. "No one's supposed to be out here," Eli said. "There aren't any trails. We hiked off-map for miles." The figure nodded. "Yes, that was all." Claire tightened her grip on the flashlight. The beam shook as she aimed it at the ground near the fire, careful not to shine it directly at the stranger. Something about his stillness made her instinctively cautious, like sudden movement might provoke something irreversible. "How did you find us?" she asked. Another pause. Too long. Then, "You made the fire." The answer settled uneasily between them. The figure hadn't shifted once. Not to adjust his posture. Not to warm his hands. He sat perfectly balanced, as if the concept of discomfort didn't apply. "I don't remember inviting anyone," Eli said. The stranger tilted his head further. "You don't remember everything." The fire popped softly. Sparks rose, briefly illuminating the man's face. And for an instant, Eli thought he saw something beneath the skin. A tension like a mask pulled tight over an unfamiliar structure. Claire felt a creeping pressure at the back of her skull. "If you were invited," she said carefully. "Who invited you?" The figure's gaze drifted. Not to her, not to Eli, but past them, deeper into the woods. "The forest," he said. The word landed heavily. Claire laughed once, sharp and brittle. "That's not funny. I didn't mean it to be." The silence that followed was deeper than before. The firelight flickered, shadows bending at angles that didn't match the flames. Eli became acutely aware of how small the campsite felt, how thin the boundary was between them and the surrounding dark. "You should go," Eli said. The figure's eyes returned to him. "I can't." "Why not?" "Because I was asked to stay." Claire's pulse raced. "Asked by who?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached toward the fire. Eli tensed, but the hand stopped short of the flames, hovering inches above them. The skin looked pale, almost translucent in the light. No heat shimmer disturbed it. The fire didn't react. "I remember the invitation," the figure said softly. "It wasn't spoken. It never is." Claire felt cold crawl up her spine. "We didn't invite you." "Not you," he replied. The forest sighed. It wasn't wind. There was no movement in the canopy. But the sound rolled through the trees anyway, low and vast, like breath drawn through something enormous and hollow. Eli's stomach dropped. There's no one else here. The figure's smile widened slightly. You're standing on it. The fire dimmed, shrinking inward as if starved of oxygen. Shadows surged forward, swallowing the edges of the clearing. Claire's flashlight flickered, then steadied, casting a weak beam that seemed to bend around the figure instead of touching him. You should leave, the figure said. It doesn't like it when guests linger. Guests, Claire whispered. The ground beneath their boots vibrated faintly. Not an earthquake, a rhythm, slow, measured. Eli took a step back. The figure's head tracked the movement precisely, eyes never blinking. It heard you when you came, he continued. Heard your footsteps, your voices, your fire. The vibration deepened. The forest around them leaned subtly inward, trunks bending just enough to be noticeable. Who are you? Eli demanded. The figure considered this. I stay when it asks me to. I leave when it's finished. The fire went out. Complete darkness rushed in, thick and immediate. Claire gasped, fumbling with the flashlight as it flickered violently, then died. In the blackness, the figure's voice remained, calm and close. It asked if you could stay too. The ground pulsed once, hard enough to knock Eli off balance. Claire grabbed his arm, heart hammering. Run, she whispered. The figure laughed. Not loudly, not cruelly, just softly amused. You already accepted, he said. Somewhere beneath the forest floor, something vast shifted its weight. And far above them, the trees creaked. Not with wind, but with anticipation. They noticed claw marks on the trees, fresh ones, leading directly toward their campsite. Caleb was the first to stop. At first, he mistook them for natural damage, old splits in the bark where rot or winter stress had torn the wood apart. The forest was full of scars if you looked long enough. But the angle bothered him. The grooves weren't random. They slanted forward, deliberate, as if carved by something moving past rather than striking in place. Lena, he said quietly, come here. Lena stepped back along the narrow strip of trampled ground they'd been using as a path, boots pressing into the damp soil. She followed his gaze to the tree just off the clearing's edge. 3 long gouges ran down the trunk, deep enough to expose pale inner wood. Sap still bled from the wounds, thick and glossy, catching the dim, filtered light. That's fresh, she said. Caleb hovered his hand close to the marks without touching them. The bark around the grooves radiated a faint warmth, as if the tree hadn't finished reacting yet. Too fresh, he said, and too clean. They backed away and looked around. Once they saw them, they were everywhere. Another tree bore the same marks 20 feet away. Then another, and another. Each set appeared at roughly the same height, always in parallel lines, 3 most of the time, sometimes 4, cut with a consistency that made Caleb's stomach tighten. The spacing between the trees wasn't random either. They formed a line, leading directly toward their campsite. The forest had gone quiet in a way that felt intentional. No birdsong, no insect buzz. Even the breeze that had been whispering through the leaves moments earlier had vanished. The canopy overhead felt heavy, as though it were pressing downward. Lena folded her arms. These weren't here when we came in. Caleb shook his head. No chance. We would have noticed. They had been careful hikers, obsessive even. That was the point of coming out here, far beyond trails and park boundaries. The woods this deep felt old in a way that wasn't comforting, layered with centuries of growth and collapse. Their campsite was a shallow depression between knotted roots, chosen because it felt hidden. Now it felt like a target. Could be a bear, Caleb offered weakly. Lena crouched near one of the trees, studying the grooves. Bears don't do this, and they don't do it neatly. The marks were too narrow, too evenly spaced, and bears didn't carve lines into tree after tree, all facing the same direction. Something shifted deeper in the forest. Not a snap, not a scuttle. A slow, drawn-out creak would bending under pressure. They both froze. Somewhere to their left, a tree leaned just enough to groan, then eased back upright. The sound lingered, vibrating faintly through the ground. Lena whispered, "Did you hear that?" Caleb nodded without looking away. "Yeah." They waited. The silence that followed felt thicker than before, like a held breath stretched too long. "We should go back," Caleb said. "Pack up. Leave before it gets dark." They followed the line of marked trees, moving faster now. As they went, Caleb noticed the distance between the clawed trunks shrinking. The marks were closer together, as if whatever had made them had slowed or narrowed its focus. The forest light warped subtly. Shadows bent where they shouldn't. A tree that looked close turned out to be farther away. Sounds echoed oddly, footsteps seeming to come from just behind them even when they stopped. Lena rubbed her arms. "It feels like something's leaning in." Caleb didn't respond. He felt it too. A constant pressure, like standing beside something massive and patient. When they reached the campsite, his chest tightened. The fire pit was cold. They'd left less than an hour ago. The embers should have been warm, faintly glowing beneath the ash. Instead, the pit looked untouched, as if it had never been used. Their packs lay where they'd left them, but the ground around them had changed. Impressions pressed into the soil, long, narrow, deeper than a human footprint. They ended abruptly, as if whatever made them had lifted straight up instead of stepping forward. Lena stared at the surrounding trees. The claw marks formed a loose ring now. One tree marked, then another, each facing inward. "It walked around us," she said. A sound drifted through the woods. Scratch, pause, scratch, fresh bark being torn. It came from beyond the ring, slow and deliberate. Caleb grabbed his pack. "Don't turn around," he said, though he didn't know why. The scratching stopped. For a moment, the forest was perfectly still. Then the ground beneath their feet trembled, just slightly, like something massive had shifted its weight. Behind them, a tree creaked, closer than it should have been. And this time, the claw marks appeared on the trunk directly beside the campsite. Still wet, still warm, as if whatever had been following them had finally arrived, and was deciding where to begin.